She stood alone at the gate, her suitcase soaked by the pouring rain. The letter he'd written trembled in her hand, ink bleeding into the wet paper. You deserve someone who can give you children. I'm sorry. Behind her, the sound of a screen. Door slammed. Tiny footsteps echoed across the wooden porch. "Miss Clara?" a small voice called out. She turned slowly, heartbroken, humiliated, only to see two little faces peeking out from under the porch light. His children. The boy stepped forward, holding a crumpled drawing. "We drew this for you. Before you left." The little girl followed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Don't go. We want you to be our mommy." And just like that, the woman once discarded was now the missing piece they refused to live without. Before we jump back in, introduce yourself in the comments and tell us where you're tuning in from. We love seeing this community grow all over the world. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a story that just might change the way you see love, loss, and second chances. Dry earth cracked beneath Clara's boots as she walked the single stretch of dirt road that passed for Main Street in Birch Hollow. The sun hung low, casting long gold shadows over the faded clapboard buildings and rusted tin roofs. The only sounds were the creak of the old windmill and the occasional bark of a stray dog. People didn't smile here, not at her anyway. At the edge of the town's general store, two women whispered behind gloved hands. Their stares flicked toward Clara like knives. She didn't have to hear them to know they were talking about her. She had seen that look 100 times. It was the look people gave someone who didn't fit. Clara tucked her scarf tighter around her neck and pressed on. The limp in her left leg was more noticeable in the cold, but she'd long stopped hiding it. The wagon accident that claimed her husband's life had left her half lame and completely alone. In Birch Hollow, that meant something. Here, a woman was measured by her usefulness. Could she bear children? Keep house? Stand at Sunday service? Without looking like sin had carved its name into her skin, Clara failed on all counts. After the accident, she stopped speaking for a time. Grief swallowed her voice, and when it returned, it came only in whispers. Her hearing in one ear never came back. The doctor said the blast from the wheel snapping had done something to her eardrum. But around here, the truth didn't matter much. Rumors traveled faster than the wind, and they always changed shape by the time they reached someone else's porch. They said Clara was cursed. They said any man who touched her was bound for the grave. They said she was barren, that the womb that should have brought joy had turned, sour with sorrow, and so day after day, she lived in the corner of the town, in the small stone house her late husband had built. It sat crooked on a forgotten slope, choked in ivy and wild grass. The neighbors called it Widow's End. Clara called it silence. Inside, it was always quiet. No footsteps, no laughter, no children slamming doors or asking for jam. Just the creak of the rafters and the sound of her breath, shallow, steady, and alone. She wrote letters she never sent, sometimes to herself, sometimes to God. If you still listen, then you know. I tried. I loved him. I wasn't ready for it to end. Her hands were always busy, knitting, scrubbing, chopping firewood, but her heart stayed hollow. Even the birds seemed to avoid her yard. She wasn't always like this. Once Clara had been the laughing girl in the blue dress, the one who danced barefoot at the harvest fair. She had dreams that stretched beyond the dirt roads, but dreams rot fast in a place like Birch Hollow, especially when loss comes early and mercy runs thin. It was Mrs. Dobbins, the preacher's wife, who first suggested it. "There's no shame in writing to a paper, dear," she'd said, sipping bitter tea through tight lips. "There are widowers out west who need a strong woman, a quiet woman. You might still have a chance." A chance. That was all Clara had. Left, so she wrote. A simple letter, nothing dramatic. Just the truth. She described her limp, her inability to bear children, and her desire not to die alone. She didn't mention the scars, the silence, or the nightmares. To her surprise, someone wrote back, Mr. Henry Wallace, a farmer, a father, a man who, by his own words, was tired of cold suppers and lonelier mornings. He was raising 2 children on his own. His wife had passed 3 winters ago, and his land was too much for one man to tend. Clara reread his letter more times than she could count. It was plain, but something in it felt sincere. Not romantic, no. Just honest. They exchanged 4 letters in total. Then one day a parcel arrived, a train ticket westbound and a note. If you're willing, we can try. I make no promises but to give you a roof and respect. The rest, we'll see. She packed her things in silence. No one came to see her off. Not a soul waved at the station. The only sound as the train pulled away was the whistle cutting through the morning fog. And as the wheels turned, Clara whispered to herself, barely louder than a prayer, "Please let them need me. Please let them see more than what I've lost." Before we dive into the next part of the story, just a quick note. We've just hit 3,000 subscribers. A big thank you to everyone who's joined the journey. Your support means everything. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join the family. The train sighed as it slowed into the station at Elder Creek, a town not much bigger than the one Clara had left behind, but somehow different. The trees stood taller here. The wind didn't just bite, it carried something with it. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. She stepped off the last carriage with her single suitcase in hand. A few people milled about, but no one seemed to notice her at first. Then she saw him, leaning against a post, arms folded, dust on his boots, and sun in his eyes. Henry Wallace. He was older than she expected. His letter didn't mention the streaks of gray in his beard or the deep lines around his mouth. But his frame was sturdy, like the kind of man who didn't ask for help unless he meant to give something in return. He nodded once. "Miss Clara." She returned the nod and gave a soft "Mr. Wallace." That was it. No embrace, no small talk. Just a quiet acknowledgement. 2 people aware of what they were, and more painfully what they weren't. The ride back to his homestead was mostly silent, save for the rattle of the wagon wheels and the occasional creak of leather reins. Henry didn't push conversation. Clara was grateful for that. As they turned off the main road, the land opened up. Rolling fields. A red barn faded from sun. And the farmhouse. Simple, clean, worn around the edges. Just like him. She noticed the toys scattered on the porch before she saw the children. A boy, maybe 8, sat carving something with a pocket knife, while a little girl with wild brown curls peeked out from behind the doorframe. Her eyes were wide and watchful. Henry cleared his throat. "Kids, this is Miss Clara. She'll be staying with us." The girl didn't say a word. She only blinked once, then ran back inside. The boy studied Clara like a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. Then, without a word, he picked up his carving and walked off behind the house. Henry sighed. "They'll warm up. Been just us a long while now." Clara nodded. "I understand." He led her inside, showed her the guest room, the kitchen, the root cellar, gave her the rules. Dinner at 6, church on Sundays, chores by sunup. Then left her alone. It wasn't rejection. Not yet. But it wasn't warmth either. That night, she lay in the narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, the sound of the wind pressing against the window. No screams, no sobs, just silence. But it wasn't the same silence as Birch Hollow. This one had breath in it. Days passed. Clara worked. She mended clothes, scrubbed floors, tended the hens. The children kept their distance. Henry too. But sometimes, she'd catch him watching her. Not with suspicion, but curiosity. Like he was trying to understand something no one had explained. One afternoon, as she gathered eggs, he joined her in the coop. Not to help, just to stand nearby. "You don't complain," he said finally. Clara didn't look up. Not much use in it. He paused, then added, "The last woman I tried to bring out here. She stayed 3 days. Couldn't stand the quiet." Clara gave a faint smile. "The quiet's the only thing that doesn't judge me." Their eyes met. For a moment he didn't look away. Then came the sound of boots. The boy, running toward them, face red. "Pa, Mr. Alden says there's a coyote near the sheep pen." Henry turned to Clara. "You all right finishing up here?" "Go," she said gently. "I'm fine." And she was. More fine than she'd been in years. Word spread quickly, as it always did in small places. Henry Wallace brought in a crippled woman from the East. She can't even have children, they say. Imagine letting someone like that near his little girl. At the general store, Clara could feel the stares. At church, the whispers were quieter, but only just. She didn't cry. Didn't flinch. She was used to it. But one afternoon, walking back from the well, she saw it. Someone had drawn a symbol on the fence post near the house, a crooked X, a warning, a mark used decades ago to curse land. Henry came home late that night, tired and dusted in dirt. When he saw the mark, he cursed under his breath and wiped it clean with his sleeve. Someone's idea of a joke, he muttered. But Clara saw the way his jaw clenched, the way his hand hovered on the rifle inside the door. The danger wasn't just rumors anymore. That night, Clara sat on the porch, hands folded in her lap. The sky stretched wide and endless above her, stars blinking like they knew secrets she never would. Henry stepped out quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He offered her one. "Thought you might want something warm." She took it, surprised. "Thank you." They sat in silence, not uncomfortable, just full, like there were words neither of them knew how to say. Finally, he spoke. "You ever think about leaving?" Clara sipped her tea. "I think about it every morning, and again every night. But I stay." "Why?" She turned to look at him, really look. "Because even if I'm not wanted here, at least here, I'm needed." His eyes softened. "I never said you weren't wanted." She blinked. "You haven't said much of anything." He chuckled. "I'm not much for talk. Kids barely speak to me anymore either." "They're hurting," Clara said. "Same as you." Henry stared into the dark. "You think that's why you're here? To fix something broken?" "No," Clara whispered. "I'm here because I'm broken too. But that doesn't mean I can't love what's left." In the weeks that followed, something shifted. The little girl Elsie began to sit near Clara during supper. Not next to her, just near. Then one morning, she slipped Clara a dandelion. "It's for your hair," she whispered, then ran away. The day. Boy, Luke took longer. He watched her for days as she fed the chickens, always lurking just out of reach. Then one afternoon he held out his carving, a small bird, rough around the edges but full of care. "It's for your windowsill," he said, "so it doesn't feel empty." Clara didn't cry. Not then. But later, in her room, holding the bird in her hands, she let go of a sob that had lived inside her for years. She didn't notice Henry standing at the doorway until he stepped inside. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her on the bed and placed his calloused hand over hers. It wasn't a proposal or a promise. It was something quieter, stronger. It was the wind shifting. The snow came earlier than expected that year. It coated Elder Creek in silence, muffling the streets and softening the edges of the barns and roofs. But nothing could soften the sharpness of what happened next. It began with a letter, a plain envelope left on the church pew beside Clara one chilly Sunday morning. No name on the front, just a folded note inside. "We don't need broken women raising our future. Go back where you came from. Your kind don't belong here." There was no signature, no handwriting she recognized, but the message was as clear as winter glass. She left the service early, boots crunching through snow, her breath ragged. Henry found the note later, tucked in the folds of her hymn book. When he read it, something in his face darkened. Not anger, something deeper, regret maybe, or guilt. By the time he got home, Clara was already packing. "I'm leaving," she said, standing by the narrow bed, hands trembling around the hem of her coat. Henry stepped forward. "Don't let cowards." Chase you out. She looked at him then, eyes filled with a pain too deep for tears. You think this is about cowards? This town was never going to let me belong, Henry. No matter how many floors I scrub, no matter how many eggs I gather or stories I read to your children. He was quiet. Clara stuffed the last of her things into the suitcase. It doesn't matter how kind your daughter is, or how your son carved me a bird, or how you started looking at me like I was more than a shadow. She turned to face him. Because when people see me, all they see is the woman who can't bear children, who limps when she's tired, who was left at an altar and talked about like a ghost. His jaw clenched. I see you. No, she whispered. You see pieces of me. But the rest? No one's ever tried. She walked past him, her boots crunching over the hardwood floor like cracking ice. She didn't make it far. The storm rolled in heavy and fast, swallowing the road behind her and turning the path into a sheet of white. Her suitcase was too heavy, her breath too short. Somewhere near the edge of a frozen creek, her leg gave out. The pain shot up from the old break, the one she never talked about. She fell hard. The cold seeped into her bones, the silence wrapping around her like a shroud. She thought of Birch Hollow, of the whispers, of the veil in her fist. She thought maybe this was how it ended. Maybe she'd just become another name on a headstone no one visited. But someone did. Not with shouting. Not with search parties or lanterns. Just one man. One voice. Clara. Is he or broke through the wind like a thread of warmth. She opened her eyes, vision blurred by snow, and there he was, Henry, his coat already dusted in white, kneeling beside her. I told you not to walk out like that. She managed a weak smile. Guess I'm more stubborn than you thought. He didn't answer. Just wrapped her in his arms, pulled her close, and started walking. Not back to the farmhouse, and it was too far in that weather. He took her to the barn, tucked her in the hay near the stove, covered her with his own coat. He didn't ask questions. Didn't say I told you so. He just sat beside her, fed the fire, and waited. In the orange glow of that little stove, Clara saw him clearer than ever. Not the strong-jawed, stoic man who fixed fences and raised kids, but the man who watched her from across a room, who brought her tea in silence, who let her exist without expectation. Why did you come after me? She asked, voice hoarse. Henry shrugged. Because I knew where you'd go. I know you. No, she said. You don't. Not really. He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I found this, hidden in the church office. I think it's the original copy of that note. Clara took it, confused. Below the hateful message was a name, Agnes Templeton, the mayor's wife. Clara's eyes widened. Why would she? She thinks I'm too soft. That my kids need a woman who can give them siblings. Clara's chest ached. So she did this. Henry nodded. She saw something she didn't like. Maybe because for once I was starting to look at someone and think, maybe I didn't have to be lonely forever. Clara's breath caught. He met her eyes. I don't care if you limp, or can't have children. I don't need more kids. I need someone who sees my pain and doesn't flinch. She looked away. And what if I never stop flinching? Then I'll stand beside you. Every time. That night Clara didn't sleep, not because of the cold, but because something inside her was thawing, and it terrified her. The next morning, the storm cleared. Henry helped her back to the farmhouse, step by slow step. Elsie ran from the porch the moment she saw them, arms flung around Clara's waist. Luke followed, holding her scarf, the one she'd dropped. You left, he said softly. You didn't even say goodbye. Clara knelt slowly, tears pricking her eyes. I thought it'd be easier for you if I wasn't here. Elsie clung tighter. But it's not. Luke looked up at Henry. Can we keep her? Henry raised an eyebrow. She's not a puppy, son. But Clara laughed through her tears, because for the first time in years, someone wanted her, not just to work, not just to fill space, to belong, and that was more than enough to make her stay. The morning after the storm, the town woke to more than snowdrifts and broken fences. It woke to a rumor, a quiet rebellion brewing just past the pine line. Clara had stayed, not just in body but in spirit, and it rattled the bones of Birch Hollow. Agnes Templeton's circles whispered louder now, but this time so did others, like Ida Hartley, who handed Clara extra fabric without a word, or Mr. Jenkins, who offered the lumber that built a new chicken coop on Henry's land. Whispers don't always come in venom. Sometimes they come in quiet acts of defiance. And Clara, she found her hands again. She worked with Henry side by side, sleeves rolled, sweat mingling with sawdust. They repaired the barn roof, cleared the broken tree limbs. They built not just a home, but a rhythm, a life. Henry taught her to ride again. She hadn't ridden since the accident, the one that crushed her ankle, stole her balance, and left her with a limp. But he led the horse slowly, patiently, hand on her back like a steady wind. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. "I do," she whispered. "To myself." And she did. One stubborn hoof after another, she learned to trust the saddle again, to trust the earth, and maybe, slowly, to trust Henry. One night as dusk kissed the window's gold, Clara found herself sitting with Luke and Elsie by the fire. Luke was carving again, a fox this time, while Elsie braided Clara's hair in tiny, awkward knots. "She likes you," Luke said bluntly. "I like her too." "And Papa?" Clara hesitated. Elsie rested her chin on Clara's shoulder. "He smiles more when you're here." That night, Clara sat on the porch, wrapped in Henry's old coat, staring at the stars. "You ever think," she asked softly as Henry joined her, "that maybe broken people still carry sparks?" He nodded. "Sometimes it's the broken ones who burn the brightest." But the flame they built didn't go unnoticed. A letter arrived, this one sealed, stamped, and formal, from a man named Sheriff Tolman, a relic of Henry's past. "I'm coming to collect what's mine," it read. Henry's face went blank when he read it. Clara waited, but he said nothing, just folded the letter and slipped it into the stove. "What did it mean?" she finally asked. He didn't look at her. "It means I have to tell you something I should have told you before." Years ago, Henry had worked with Tolman as a deputy. They were close, like brothers, until Tolman fell in with a railroad tycoon who wanted to clear the local homesteads by force. Henry refused to help. He left the badge, left the law, but before he walked away, he reported Tolman's dealings, and in return, Tolman swore revenge. "You think he'll hurt you?" Clara asked. "No," Henry said. "He'll hurt what I've built. You, the kids, us." That night Clara couldn't sleep. Old fears crawled back. The idea that love was fragile, that homes could be taken, that belonging was a borrowed dream. She rose before dawn and saddled the mare Henry had given her. She rode into town, head high, heart pounding, straight to the sheriff's office. Tolman looked older than the stories, lines carved into his jaw like dried leather, eyes like storm clouds. "I'm here," Clara said, "to ask what you want." He looked her over. "So you're the mail-order widow who stitched herself into a place that don't belong to her." She didn't flinch. "I'm the woman raising his kids, working his land, earning her keep." "You don't belong in Birch Hollow," he said, voice sharp. "And Henry don't belong to you. He belongs to what he ran from." Clara stepped closer, voice like a slow fire. "No one owns him, not even you. He stood for what was right." "What are you standing for?" Tolman stared at her, unmoved. "I'm coming for him, you can't stop that." She leaned in, eyes burning. "Maybe not. But if you come for him, you're coming for all of us. And this time, Henry's not standing alone." She rode back before noon. Henry met her at the fence, worry tight in his brow. "You didn't have to." "Yes," she said. "I did. Because that's what people do when they love someone. They ride into storms." The town gathered the next morning, not by summons but by instinct. Tolman came, as promised. But what he found wasn't a frightened man or a fragile woman. It was a family. Children clutching Clara's hands, townsfolk standing at her back, Henry with a hammer in one hand and a ledger of names in the other, a record of every homestead Tolman helped erase. "I've got nothing to hide," Henry said. "But this town's got eyes now, and they're not afraid anymore." Tolman left without a word, and Birch Hollow shifted. Something cold had broken. Something warm took root. That night, Clara sat by the fire again, Luke and Elsie asleep on her shoulders. Henry brought her tea. He hesitated before speaking. "You don't have to stay. You could go somewhere no one whispers, where you're not the story people keep retelling." She looked up. "But this place," she said, "is where I found my fire again, and I'm not leaving it behind." He nodded, eyes soft, and in that moment, without ceremony, he knelt beside her and took her hand, not with a ring, not with a promise, just a hand in hers. Steady. Sure. The kind of vow that doesn't need words. The snow melted slow that year. The frost receded like an old story, finally finished. And underneath it, spring waited. Quiet, patient, hopeful. So did Clara. She had been waiting, not for Henry's answer, not even for the town's acceptance, but for something deeper, a sign that she belonged, not just in his home, in their lives, in her own skin again. The Sunday after Tolman's retreat, the townsfolk gathered for market, the square bustling with chatter, barter, and biscuits. Clara stood near the fabric stall, Elsie tucked against her hip. Luke had vanished, somewhere chasing marbles. The whispers were there, some soft, some still sharp, but they didn't cut like they used to. She'd grown skin thickened not by bitterness, but by becoming. She was no longer the woman who came by train, head down and dreams threadbare. She was a woman who had stayed, who had earned her place not by proving, but by living. And then she heard it. Boots against wood. Purposeful. Steady. She turned. There stood Henry, clean-shaven, his Sunday shirt ironed, his coat patched and proud. Luke trailed behind him, holding a small wooden box. The crowd quieted, naturally, curiously, as he stepped onto the old well-stone in the center of town, and looked straight at her. "I never said this right," Henry began, voice even but shaking slightly, not where people could hear it, not where she could believe it. The townsfolk leaned in, breath drawn. She didn't ride here looking for glory or pity. She came with nothing but a scar, a limp, and a heart more fierce than I deserved. Murmurs. Rippled. She took care of my children before I even asked. She rebuilt what I let fall apart, and she made this town softer just by standing her ground. He stepped down, crossed to her, held out his hand. Clara looked around, at faces that once looked through her, now watching with something else. Not judgment, not disbelief, hope. She doesn't need this town to name her worthy. But I do. He opened the box. No ring, just a hand-carved wooden heart. "Clara," he said, voice cracking, "if you still want this life, not just with me but with all its hard corners and quiet mornings, I'll spend every day making sure you know you were never the mistake." The world paused. Clara didn't speak. She simply took the heart, pressed it to her chest, then reached out and took his hand. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. There are some vows that silence understands better than words. They married, that summer, in the field behind the orchard, wildflowers blooming in crooked rows like nature's applause. No veil. Just Clara's hair loose around her shoulders, the scar on her cheek catching sunlight like a badge, not a shame. Elsie danced barefoot with ribbons in her braids. Luke walked beside Clara down the makeshift aisle, holding her hand with solemn pride. When the sun dipped low, they lit lanterns and tied them to branches, letting their soft glow whisper into the night. After the guests faded and the fire dwindled, Clara stood beneath the stars, arms wrapped around herself. Henry came up behind her, slipping his coat around her shoulders. "You rouse warm enough?" he asked. She turned, smiled. "I've never been warmer." He held her hand. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. There was nothing left to prove. A month later, Clara sat by the cradle in the loft, not with a newborn, but with an old photograph. Her sister, long gone, smiled up from its worn edge. "I named her Ruth," Clara whispered, touching the carved nameplate beneath the cradle. "For you." Ruth was the name no one in Birch Hollow had heard before, but it belonged to the girl who'd once braided Clara's hair and promised her she'd matter. Now that promise lived again, in wood, in breath, in home. Closing lines: she was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe, and let me introduce you to the next miracle